So why kind of study time? I think that that's a lot of people's kind of questions around this. I actually this lecture is coming out of a course that I took when I was in grad school, and the whole semester we talked about anthropology of time. Um, Time does gives life meaning. Um, Again, if we just lived forever, we wouldn't need to celebrate things like birthdays and the rhythms of the calendar and holidays and all those other things. I don't know that it gives us this kind of meaning. Um, if we live forever, birthdays and rites of passage moments would have no meaning. Ray Kurzweil is a futurist. I think he works with Google. He's also written a lot of books around like singularity and what it looks like when machines can do what the human brain can do. He kind of predicts that happening by like around 20, in between 2030 and 2050. And that then people could kind of almost download their consciousness into a machine. And the question is kind of, well, what does that do to our structures of time in terms of culture and time? So he kind of thinks that we'll have reverse engineer the brain by 2030. And that there's a video on him and YouTube, and I think it's titled Singularity. He also Spiritual Machines is a book that he wrote that I've read. And again, by 2050, AI will exist and be able to do everything that we do. So, we're really looking at like 30 years before things drastically kind of change in our world, and we're going to have to be part of that conversation and redefine what culture is, its meaning, how we should live. And I would say that we've kind of done this throughout time, but I don't know that it's been super drastic and super impactful right away. The other conversation that comes up around time and work time is the idea of automation taking 30 to 60% of our jobs over the next 12 years. When that happens, and you have self-driving trucks and self-cleaning bathrooms and McDonald's that are large vending machines, which we're already starting to get. This brings up the question of what do we do in terms of our time. And one of the experiments that you guys should probably research on your own is the idea of universal basic income. Universal basic income would just basically pay everybody a set wage to survive. And then if you worked on top of that, the market would still exist, so you could make more money if you wanted to. What it really does is free up time, and it gets back to kind of this egalitarian idea around doing what you're talented at. So if you've always wanted to be an artist, but it never paid the bills, and you're kind of forced into this work world that you have no passion for, and then having this universal basic income changes all that, flips it on its head, where now you can be an artist and you can sell some paintings. You're getting paid to do what you want to do. So this is another kind of area of time. And yeah, I do suggest you guys look up universal basic income. It's becoming a real conversation because over the next 12 years, things are drastically going to change for us. And the next 20 after that, again, there's going to be another massive change. And we're going to have to make a decision on how to live. And I would say that, things have been so gradual over the last, hundreds of years in terms of development and tech that we haven't had to all like kind of come together and have these conversations at the same time. Maybe around like, the American Revolution, those kinds of things. But in terms of, drastic like life changes around how we operate on the day to day, that it's going to, it's going to be a very unique time in history because we're not actually going to have to do much work, manual or physical labor anymore. Machines and robots will basically be able to do that. That science fiction kind of stuff that we talked about in the 50s through the 80s is coming true now, and there's real cultural ramifications to it for sure. One of the other things that ends up coming up about time is death and death taboos and funerary practices. So this is in America we have kind of some true death taboos. We tend to all want to live forever. When we talk about somebody dying before like 85, it's almost like a tragedy, and we refer to death as a tragedy. And remember, indigenous people would just basically call that life, and not necessarily kind of focused in on it being a tragedy. But so here's some examples of some of these kind of death taboos and funerary practices. Some interesting stuff. Many cultures don't speak of the dead or use their name or anything that sounds like it. Ishi in the book Ishi, he's the last kind of native up in the north of California, works with Kroeber at UC Berkeley. He wasn't allowed to say the names of his dead relatives. The taboo is that if you say their name, that linguistic symbol is connected to ghosts and kind of black magic and the spirit world. And fascinating, is that what's the function is always the question, right? And so what is the function of that? Maybe it eliminates grief. If you're not able to say their name, you can kind of think of them being there, but maybe also that's a form of elimination of grief. Taboo on touching the dead, surrounding the dead, and mourning is defined with cultural norms and taboos. Some groups don't let you touch them. Some groups, it's only the family that can. I remember this when I was 12 and my grandfather died. My younger relatives had no problem kind of kissing him while he was laying there in the casket. But for me, I had already developed kind of a touching the dead taboo. And I did it, on my own, not that anybody had to tell me. I guess it just scared me that, Grandpa was no longer alive and I wasn't going to get a reciprocal kind of hug back or whatever. But yeah, some fascinating things around kind of the proxemics and the body language around the dead. The Guaycurus of Paraguay, when someone died, the chief would rename everyone in the tribe, and they would take on these new names. And again, I asked kind of what is the function of them, the chief renaming the whole tribe, right? You now have a new name, and this is the name we're going to use. So I'll give you like 2 seconds to kind of think on your own in terms of what the function would be. So one of the possible functions may be that it's this kind of spirit world connection, black magic, that the spirits know the names of the people in their tribe, so they could come back and actually haunt them, or inflict some kind of angst because they know your name. So now the chief has changed your name, so they won't be able to find you, right? So there's the function there. The Guajiro of Colombia, mentioning a family member's dead kin's name in front of the family is punishable by death. So, let's say that you've lost a relative, and somebody in the tribe says, "Oh man, I really miss your Uncle John." That is punishable by death. Like they mentioned the name of your dead relative, and again, this is a strict taboo around kind of the dead and naming. The Guirama funeral rituals. This is Africa. Women dance in a provocative way to distract mourners and relatives of the deceased. It symbolizes the extremity of life's borders, and it mocks the despair and the finality of death. So it's kind of a fascinating thing. In general, the Giriyama are very like respectful, and people have their role and their place. But when somebody dies, the females really they kind of dance very provocatively with the relatives of the dead. So it's just a fascinating component of what's acceptable, what's not, when is it acceptable, and around death to distract the mourners. This is one of those things. So women through song and dance direct action towards men. They symbolizes unity and pride. They also vent their kind of complaints about male power in this. They're able. It's their one kind of area where they can kind of just throw off kind of their normal, maybe male-dominated kind of views or cultural workings, and convey their joy in breaking through this sexual decorum normally expected of them, right? So there's this just fascinating around how different groups of people have how they view death, their death taboos involved, and then their funerary practices. So again, part of the American death taboo is that we almost, part of it is that we, Judeo-Christian kind of background, is we get to kind of act as though we're all going to see all the dead again in some future life. So it almost makes death kind of maybe a non-issue. I mean, the other thing that I find fascinating, and I don't know if this is like a phenomenon or just kind of my own family and how we operate, but my grandpa's been dead since 1992, and not one of us has gone back to visit his gravesite. We went there, we buried him, and we haven't gone back. So there's almost this, the taboo is to not recognize that that is where he lays, that actually he's somewhere else, right? And we can talk about this kind of future meeting again place, but in terms of physicality, that going to his grave spot is not actually necessary or productive in any way. All right, so in terms of moving kind of in a closing out of this class, I really have enjoyed a lot of your guys' discussions. They're in depth and great analysis, and appreciate all of your interactions. So in closing the class out, I want to kind of discuss again global culture, right? It's the level above that macro culture, which is that kind of human component. If we are all one human race, what does our global culture look like? So, what does it mean to be human? These are big questions that we should be asking. What are our universal traits, like basic needs? Everybody has a creation story. How are we different, right? So do we have these minutiae of differences that make us unique? Humanism and anthropology, so this human kind of level of it's us, and how do we deal with the responsibilities of having opposable thumbs and being able to blow things up, but also being able to regenerate environments and stuff like that. And then does poverty mean the same thing for everyone? And then if we're all products of our culture with literal no say as to what the culture is and does, how can we judge others? And this is kind of the big question, right? You're going to have to flash back to your cultural relativity and ethnocentrism. Really, my question is if we are taught not to judge, and everybody is a product of their culture, why do we still continue to judge individuals, right? And anthropologists can be guilty of this as well, but I would say that it has a lot to do with the kind of situational negotiation of identity, right? In one role, you tend to be the anthropologist that occupies this identity spectrum portion, and then in another role, you're an American and you want to connect with the people around you. So when they say something mean or bad about a person or a group of people, you kind of jump in and you're back this generalization up that doesn't really make sense. You don't want to always be that anthropologist in the room that's kind of constantly correcting people on their language and how they view these things. So this is a major conundrum in terms of analyzing and judging people. So in terms of definition of humanism, it's a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings, individually and collectively, and generally prefers critical thinking and evidence and acceptance of dogma over acceptance of dogma and superstition. So this is more positivism in terms of and empiricism, more into kind of scientific rationale around humans and how we interact with things. And anthropology tends to tie itself very closely to humanism because it's the focus of human, right, and what it means to be human. Lakyoda, 1200 BCE, Indian materialism. A lot of humanism is coming out of this time period. It's human-centric philosophy that seeks to exclude supernatural. It ends up leading to Buddhism in the axial age. So this kind of idea around human centricity and where is my place in the universe, rather than kind of the great spirit controlling the earth and us kind of occupying that space. Rather now it's the internal individual human and looking out instead of out kind of looking in. Very kind of juxtaposition of ideas. So really quick, going back to the kind of situational and like judgment, be thinking about like when, and again, I think that judgment can be replaced with the word analysis, right? Again, critical analysis doesn't mean that you're being critical of somebody, but it means that you're like using a fine-tooth comb to analyze what's going on, and it may be functionality or symbols. But when you get into analysis, it can be less judgy, right? Like if I say that, I'll give you an example. So, that person just cut me off. He's stupid, or he or she is stupid, right? That is a judgment. You're basically calling that person out as an individual with this issue. But if I say that wow, that person must be in a hurry, that's analysis, right? So that's a very different thing that I just did with that example. But be thinking about that kind of going next